Yo people YouTube, I'm the Watch Idiot, and today I'll be doing my first comparison video, and it's gonna be an interesting one just because it's gonna be between my Tudor Black Bay 58 Blue and the SPB143 from Seiko. And yeah, so they are quite different in terms of overall look and execution, but I feel like they can probably hold the same position in someone's collection as the everyday dive watch sort of thing. So instead of me what's in my eye? So instead of me rambling on for 30 minutes, an hour, I'm going to make this a little bit more structured. I'm gonna do it on a points system, and there's gonna be 6 categories worth 10 points and 3 categories worth 5 points. And also I made these categories slightly more general so that I can use the same system for any watch that, you know, I might choose to compare, you know, down the line. So yeah, go ahead and keep track of your own scores, you know, based on my point system, and, you know, let me know down in the comments what you guys end up with. Okay, so yeah, let's just get into it. And yeah, I'm excited because the final score was not what I was expecting, like, at all. So onto the dial, and the Seiko, I gave it a 9.5 just because 10 is pretty much reserved for Grand Seiko at this point, but the dial for me on the SPB is just about as good as it gets, just because I love the gray color and it works so well with the extremely well done sunburst finish. And the handset on this watch is just next level stuff, just because these hands are probably my absolute favorite hands of any diver, I think, which is pretty much my entire collection. So for the Black Bay 58, you know, I gave it an 8 and that's because it is a great looking dial. The matte finish is exceptionally done, and you know, it looks very high quality. Everything just exudes quality, but in the end, I mean, it's just simple and effective. Nothing more than that, really. Oh, and how could I forget? The lume on these watches are incredible. Both of them are super bright, very crisp, very well applied. That's really what we would expect from Seiko and Tudor at this point. So yeah, both have done very well on that end. So case and bezel, and yeah, let's start with the Seiko once again. And I gave that an 8 because the design of the case is awesome. I absolutely love the radial brush on the top, and then also alongside the brushed case sides as well, and just the overall shape of it. And it still has the classic Seiko curves on it, so it makes it a super comfortable case. But on the flip side, it is a little heavy, which is a bit irritating for me, and it gets a little bit tiring sometimes. Also, the coin edge bezel looks really great. You know, the bezel insert is really cool, but the traditional Seiko bezel feel is, you know, it's okay. So onto the Tudor, and I gave it an 8 as well. So it's pretty much for the, you know, flipped reasons as the Seiko. And yeah, the case is beautifully finished. I mean, the polishing is amazing. The brushing on the top is absolutely amazing. I mean, it just exudes quality. There's no denying that. But nothing really wows me about the case necessarily. And you know, I get that this is supposed to be a simple, classic, you know, vintagey dive watch case, but the bezel, on the other hand, it, you know, it looks simple, you know, it's classic, and it pairs nicely with the overall aesthetic, and really pairs nicely with the dial because the blues are matched very well. But it's the bezel feel. I mean, my God, it is. I mean, the Tudor bezel feels are by far the best bezel feels on the market, short of a Submariner. So I've got my G-Shock on right now. Let's listen to it right now because I kind of really want to as well. And I also want to feel it too, and I want to hear it. One second. Oh God, this is gonna be really frustrating. So yeah, if you want to get a little bit more context, you know, for why I'm so frustrated with this section, just check out my other videos on the SPB and the Black Bay 58 Blue. But yeah, both of these bracelets get 7 points for me, and for very similar reasons. I mean, both of these bracelets were so close to being perfect, but they just made these stupid mistakes. So technically speaking, both of these bracelets are well finished, and you know, they feel pretty solid, which is great. But the end link on the Seiko has this really big gap on it, and which is bizarre. And the links are just a little bit too thick, which makes the bracelet a little bit heavy, and then also paired with a case that's pretty heavy, it just makes the whole thing just a little bit too unnecessarily tiring, at least in my opinion. But in the end, I can wear it, if I really want to, since I am a bracelet guy. It does fit my wrist, at least. So Tudor, on the other hand, is super irritating as well, and part of that is because the end link isn't really flush with the case, even though there's no reason for it not to be flush. And also the steel is finished slightly different from the case, and also the tone of the steel is slightly different from the case, which is to me absolutely bizarre and irritating. And this happens with all Tudors for that matter. But the most irritating thing about it is that I simply cannot, for the life of me, get a good fit on that bracelet, because it doesn't have any half links, and it doesn't have an extra micro adjust hole, even though there's very clearly room for a fourth hole in there. Just for context, every other bracelet that I own pretty much works perfectly for me, so it's not that my wrist is weird. So just so you know. So onto the movement, and I gave the Seiko a 7 and a Tudor a 9, just because the 6R35 movement is great and it does the job very well. It's reliable. It's got a 70-hour power reserve, which is a big plus point for me. But the stated accuracy of the movement is plus 25 minus 15 seconds a day. And yeah, I know that the vast majority of the time, the movement performs much better than that, but I mean, it's still a $1,200 watch. Tudor, on the other hand, is wonderful. It's got a 70-hour power reserve, which is great, and it beats at 4 Hertz and 28,800 beats per hour, and it's rated at +4 minus 2 seconds a day, and honestly, it does much better than that vast majority of the time. So of course, I haven't forgotten that there is a big price gap between the Tudor and the Seiko, but even when comparing the Tudor to other watches at the same price point, I still think that the movement would be a really great deal. So what's it like on wrist? And yeah, this section was a little tough just because at the moment I can't wear the Tudor bracelet because it doesn't fit. So I'll be comparing both of these watches on their experiences, on straps, to keep that in mind. So that being said, I gave the Seiko an 8 and the Tudor a 9. So both of these watches wear really great on the wrist and they are pretty comfortable. Tudor being more comfortable than the Seiko, but for the Seiko I had to knock off a point just because the case is on the thicker side and it does weigh quite a bit more than the Tudor, so that does pose some issues when it's on wrist. I mean, sometimes the watch head sags a little bit depending if the strap doesn't have enough oomph to it. The Tudor, on the other hand, wears like a friggin' dream, just because I mean, it's pretty thin, is well balanced. I mean, it works well on any strap that you put it on, and when it's on the wrist, you almost forget that it's there, which for me is very important just because I don't want a watch to be tiring necessarily, depending on the watch, all things considered. Okay, so value is a tough one because, as you may be well aware, these are at very different price points. So I decided to compare them in terms of their individual value in their own context and in their own price point, as opposed to comparing them, to each other directly, just so it's a little bit even weighting, I guess. And so for that reason, I gave the Seiko a 7 and the Tudor an 8.5. So the Seiko got a 7 mainly because of the bracelet, and that's because if you want this gray dial version new, you'll have to spend about $1,200 for it. And if you want the gray dial version, you can't get it without the bracelet. So for the bracelet to have such loose tolerances and to be so heavy to the point that it almost becomes, not enjoyable to wear, I feel a bit ripped off just because I paid an extra $200 for the bracelet, so I would want to use it, especially considering I'm a bracelet guy. As for the Tudor with the 8.5, it scored high because, like I said before, it just exudes quality, you know, at every single corner. I mean, when you look at it, when you feel it on your wrist, when you have it in your hand, and also paired with that really great 70-hour power reserve movement, the overall value for $3,700 is pretty awesome. But I did have to dock some points because of that stupid bracelet and the lack of adjustment. Okay, so Strapmonsterability is worth 5 points just because I really don't think it's, you know, as big of a deal breaker in any way. Both the Tudor and the Seiko scored 4 points in this section just because, you know, both of these watches, you know, work on a whole bunch of, you know, straps that I have. You know, there's a lot of space in between the spring bars and the case, you know, so it's able to, you know, fit really thick straps in there as well. However, the Seiko lost a point over here just because it is quite top heavy, like I mentioned before, and Tudor loses a point over here just because, you know, the blue dial is quite subtle, but it is still very blue, so there are just going to be some straps out there that, in my opinion, just don't work. So uniqueness, and obviously this is very much based on my own opinion, but I gave the Seiko a 4 and the Tudor a 2. So it got a 2 just because, I mean, it's a pretty standard looking watch, which isn't inherently a bad thing, just because, you know, having a simple, you know, do everything kind of watch is, you know, a big part of its attraction, but it doesn't strike me as anything terribly unique. I mean, there's going to be a whole bunch of watches out there that look very similar to it, so, you know, which, you know, for better or for worse, and this kind of watch is, I guess, a victim of its own success. Seiko gets a bit more of a bump just because it is pretty unique, you know, the overall design, you know, although it does have a classic-y skin diver case, but it still has that Seiko flair to it, and you don't really see that sort of watch design all that often. So the TWI Happy Index is an index that I completely made up. It's just about how happy a watch makes me when I just look down and see it on my wrist. For this one, I gave the Seiko a 4.5 and the Tudor gets a 3.5. That's just because, you know, when I look down and I see the Seiko, I mean, when I see that amazing gray sunburst dial paired with those gorgeous hands and finishing on the hands, I can't help but smile. I mean, it's just such an amazing pair, and it just looks so good in so many different lights every single time I see it. On the other hand, when I see the Tudor, you know, I just feel an immense, amount of respect for the watch. I mean, every single part of the watch head is, you know, executed at a very high level, and you can once again immediately tell that you've got an amazing watch on your wrist, and it feels incredible as well. But it doesn't really take me much further than that, because in the end, it is a relatively simple watch, and which is supposed to be, once again, but I like watches that just make me smile. Okay, so if we add up the final score, the Seiko gets a 59 out of the 75 available points, which is solid, I guess. I mean, this is the first time that I'm using the system, no idea if it works, and yeah. And the Tudor, on the other hand, gets 59 points as well. The fact that I actually ended up with the exact same score on the first ever comparison was just wild. I mean, I was actually, you know, while I was, determining the scores for each one, just for fun, I put out these 0.5 scores in there just to be able to, you know, be the decider if need be, but I guess it didn't work. All that being said, I actually do think that the equal score is pretty accurate in terms of how I feel about them as watches as a whole. Both watches have huge plus points and also pretty big downfalls that, once again, should not have been there. But in the end, once again, both of them are immensely enjoyable for completely different reasons, and as a result, if I were to, you know, try to decide, you know, which one to buy by comparing the two of these directly, I think it would honestly be an almost impossible task that would really just come down to personal preference and budget. So on the other hand, I guess I could say that the equal score is also quite telling, because I really do think that these watches can coexist in the same collection because they tug at the heartstrings in very different ways. And yeah, I mean, I for one would love to have both of these watches in my collection, even though I can't. So there you have it. It's my first ever comparison, and I think I'll be keeping an overall score sheet for all the watches that go through this sort of comparison to judge, you know, what they all would be like compared to each other, I guess. But yeah, if you have any suggestions for pairings, let me know down in the comments, and also let me know what you guys think of my final score, and also if you're keeping track of the scores, let me know what you got in the end. So yeah, as always, please do hit that like button and hit the subscribe button as well, and the notification bell button. You know, all of those things help the channel a whole bunch. And yeah, if you want to get more info on these two watches that I compared, go ahead and check out the videos that I did on them separately. And yeah, until the next video, good day.